My name is Lauren Calloway, and I am 31 years old. 8 months ago, I drove 4 hours from Nashville to Atlanta for my sister Brittany's wedding. I had pressed my dress the night before. I had wrapped her gift carefully. I had even rehearsed what I was going to say when I hugged her at the altar. But when I walked up to the reception table and gave the woman my name, she looked down at her clipboard, then back up at me, and then down again. I watched her face shift from polite to uncomfortable in about 3 seconds. She leaned over and whispered something to her coworker. "Ma'am, I am so sorry," she said. "Your name is not on this list. I called Brittany right there in the parking lot." She answered on the second ring. Her voice was not surprised. It was not apologetic. She said, "And I want you to really hear this," she said. "Did you actually think you were going to be here?" Then she hung up. I did not cry. I did not make a scene. I walked back to my car, opened the trunk, took out the small gray gift box I had driven 4 hours to deliver, walked back to the reception table, and asked the woman to please place it on the gift table. She looked at me like she was watching something painful. I told her thank you and I left. 3 hours later, Brittany opened that box in front of 260 guests, and I have not answered a single one of her calls since. Before I tell you what was inside it, I need to take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. I grew up in a small house in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. My father drove trucks for a living and my mother worked front desk at a dental office. We were not wealthy, we were not connected. But we were a family, or at least I thought we were. Brittany is 4 years older than me. From the time I was old enough to understand anything, the message in our house was clear. Brittany was the one with the future. Brittany was the responsible one. Brittany was the one going places. When Brittany got accepted to the University of Tennessee, my parents threw a dinner party. When I got accepted to the same school 2 years later on a full academic scholarship, my mother nodded and said that was good news and went back to watching television. I do not say this to play victim. I say this because it shaped everything that came after. The moment I remember most clearly is my 16th birthday. I had been looking forward to it for months. I had not asked for much, just dinner out, maybe a small cake. That morning I came downstairs and my parents were at the kitchen table talking about Brittany's upcoming internship interview in Charlotte. Nobody said happy birthday. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Brittany, who was sitting right there eating cereal. It was my Aunt Deborah, my father's sister, who knocked on my bedroom door that evening. She was carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper and a card she had written herself. Inside the box was a digital camera, a real one, not a toy. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me I had a good eye. She had seen the photos I had been taking on my phone of the neighborhood, the light through the trees, the rain on car windows. She said, "Lauren, some people are born to notice things. You are one of them. Do not let anybody convince you that is not a talent worth something." I did not know it then, but that camera and that woman were going to change the entire direction of my life. I graduated college with honors and moved to Nashville with almost nothing. I worked as a second shooter for a wedding photography company for 2 years. I learned everything. I shot in terrible light and beautiful light. I learned how to read a room, how to find the moment before the moment, how to make people forget the camera was there. I saved money obsessively. At 26, I launched my own studio, Calloway Visual Co. 2 years after that, we had a waiting list. My family had no idea. Brittany thought I was still freelancing. My mother thought photography was a hobby I had turned into a side hustle. I never corrected them. They never asked. Brittany had moved to Atlanta, married her college boyfriend, divorced him quietly, and was now engaged to a man named Derek Fowler. His family had serious money, real estate, private equity, the kind of wealth that has its own gravity. The wedding was going to be held at a private estate in Buckhead. Invitation only. The kind of event where the flowers alone cost more than most people's monthly rent. I found out I was not invited the same way I found out most things about my family. Through someone else, my cousin Tanya texted me asking if I had gotten my invitation yet and whether I was excited. I told her I had not received anything. She went quiet. That quiet said everything. I called my mother. She answered immediately, which should have been the first sign something was off. She started talking before I finished my first sentence. She said Brittany had decided to keep the wedding very intimate. She said it was nothing personal. She said Derek's family had a lot of social obligations, and the guest list was extremely selective. I asked how many people were on that list. She paused. She said around 250 people, and not one of them was me. I did not yell. I did not cry. I said okay, and I ended the call. Then I sat in my office. In the studio I had built from the ground up, surrounded by awards and framed magazine features, and I thought about Aunt Deborah. I thought about what she had said to me over the last few years, in phone calls and handwritten cards she still sent through the mail. She had said things like, "Your family does not see you yet," and "The truth always surfaces, Lauren." Always. She had been sick for most of the previous year, dealing with a heart condition that had slowed her down considerably. She was not going to be at the wedding either. She had not been invited. But 3 weeks before the wedding, Aunt Deborah called me. She sounded tired, but her voice was warm and steady. She said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully." She told me she had updated her will 6 months prior. She told me that she had left me the majority of her estate, including her house in Franklin, Tennessee, her investment accounts, and a collection of antique jewelry that had been passed down from her mother and grandmother. The collection had been appraised. It was worth just over $1.4 million. She said, "Brittany came to see me last spring. She asked me directly if she was going to inherit the jewelry. She already had plans for it. She had already told Derek's family about it." Aunt Deborah paused. I told her I was still deciding. But I had already decided. I decided years ago. I just needed to wait for the right moment to tell you. I sat very still on my end of the phone. I asked her why she was telling me now. She said, "Because Brittany is going to open a gift at that wedding, and I want you to be the one who gives it to her." Now, if you have ever felt overlooked by the people who were supposed to love you most, I want you to stay with me. Because what happens next is going to hit different. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do it now so you do not miss the rest of this story. I booked my drive to Atlanta for the morning of the wedding. I did not tell anyone. I packed one outfit, a simple charcoal dress, professional and clean. I placed Aunt Deborah's gift on my passenger seat. It was a small gray box, no bigger than a hardcover book, tied with a plain white ribbon. I had put 3 things inside it. The first was a copy of Aunt Deborah's updated will, with my name clearly listed as the primary beneficiary. The second was a copy of the appraisal for the jewelry collection. The third was a single business card from Callaway Visual Co., my company, with a handwritten note on the back that said, "I built this while you were not looking." I arrived at the Buckhead estate just after noon. The place was extraordinary. Manicured grounds, white tent structures, staff moving in every direction. It looked like something out of a catalog. I walked to the reception table, gave my name, and watched the exact moment the woman realized it was not on the list. I watched her try to figure out what to say. I did not make it difficult for her. I told her I understood. I asked her to place the gift on the table for the bride, and I turned around. I called Brittany from the parking lot. She answered fast. Too fast. Like she had been waiting. I told her I was outside, that my name was not on the list. And Brittany said something I will never forget. She said, "Lauren, this is a grown-up event. You would not even know how to talk to these people. This is not your world." I said, "You are probably right. Please make sure someone puts my gift on the table." And I got in my car and drove to a diner down the road and ordered coffee and eggs and waited. I did not wait long. Here is what I am told happened inside that tent. About 2 hours into the reception, the MC invited the couple to open a few gifts before the cake was cut. Brittany was in her element. She was glowing. Derek was beside her, handsome and attentive. The room was full of exactly the kind of people she had spent the last decade trying to impress. She opened the first few gifts with grace and practiced elegance. Crystal. Monogrammed linen. A weekend stay at a resort in the Bahamas. Then someone handed her the small gray box with the white ribbon. She looked at the card, Her expression flickered for just a second before she reset it back to pleasant. She made a joke. She said out loud, "This is from my little sister." She held it up slightly so the table nearest to her could see. She said, "She does photography, so I am guessing it is a coupon." People laughed. Not cruelly, but they laughed. She opened the box. She pulled out the first document. The room stayed warm and social around her for about 4 seconds. Then her face changed. She read further. She set the paper down slowly and picked up the second document, the appraisal. Her eyes moved across it line by line. The room started to notice. Her new mother-in-law leaned over slightly. Derek watched his bride's face drain of color in real time. Brittany set the papers down on the table. She picked up the business card last. She read the front. She flipped it over and read the handwritten note. And that is when someone at a nearby table, a woman who apparently knew Callaway Visual Co. from a charity gala in Nashville, said out loud, "Wait, Callaway Visual is your sister's company?" A few heads turned. Someone else said they had seen the studio featured in a bridal magazine. Brittany said nothing. She was completely still. Derek picked up the appraisal document. He read it slowly. Then he looked at Brittany. He said her name once, quietly, in a way that did not sound like a question. Brittany had told Derek's family that the jewelry collection was coming to her. She had mentioned it at the family dinner when they were first introduced. She had described it in detail, its history, its value, the way it would eventually be displayed in their home. Derek's mother had been charmed by the story. Derek said, "You told us that collection was yours." Brittany said, "It is supposed to be." "It was always supposed to be mine." Derek set the document down. He said, "But it is not." The room had gone very quiet in the way rooms do when something real is happening, and no one knows whether to look away. What nobody in that room knew yet was the other half of the story. Derek's family had a business relationship with a client who used Callaway Visual Co. for 3 consecutive years. His uncle, who was seated 2 tables away, had recommended the studio to 2 separate colleagues. He recognized the name on that business card immediately. He stood up from his table and said, "Your sister runs Callaway Visual? I have referred them to half my network. They are extraordinary." Someone at another table pulled out their phone. Brittany started to say something about how I had manipulated the situation. About how Aunt Deborah had not been well and may not have been thinking clearly. About how this was clearly designed to embarrass her. Her voice was climbing in a way that was working against her with every word. Derek touched her arm once. She kept talking. He withdrew his hand. "All right, I have to stop here for just 1 second. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, hit that like button right now. Because what Brittany does next, and what Derek decides in the following 48 hours, I did not see coming either. Stay with me." I was still at the diner when my phone started lighting up. Brittany, first 6 calls in 12 minutes. Then my mother. Then a number I did not recognize, which turned out to be Derek. I did not answer any of them. I drove back to Nashville that night. I stopped once for gas, stood under the fluorescent lights of a highway station outside Chattanooga, and looked at my phone. 42 missed calls, 11 voicemails, a string of text messages from Brittany that ranged from furious to desperate within the span of about 20 minutes. I listened to exactly 1 voicemail. It was from Derek. He was calm. He said he owed me an apology. He said Brittany had described me in ways that he now understood were not true. He said he was sorry for having a picture of me in his head that had been painted entirely by someone who had reason to paint it that way. He said he hoped I was okay. I saved that message. I deleted the rest. 4 days later, Aunt Deborah called me again. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good, let it land where it needs to land." She told me she had heard from my mother. Apparently, my mother had called her to discuss the will. Aunt Deborah told her the conversation was not up for discussion. She had made her decision with full clarity and the documentation to prove it. My mother had apparently cried. Aunt Deborah said she had listened, told her she loved her, and then said that invisible does not mean unimportant, Patricia. It never did. My mother showed up at my studio 12 days after the wedding. She did not call ahead. She walked through the front door and stood in the lobby looking at the framed work on the walls. My receptionist came and got me. I walked out and found my mother standing in front of a large print, a photo I had taken at a wedding in Savannah, the bride laughing so hard, her eyes were shut and her whole body was leaning into it. My mother said, "I did not know." I said, "I know." She said I should have known. I said, "Yes." We sat in my office for almost 2 hours. She cried twice. I did not. Not because I was trying to be hard, but because I had already done that grieving a long time ago. I had grieved it in hotel rooms after shoots, in the car on the way home from holidays. In the silence of every birthday that passed without a call, I told her I was not going to perform forgiveness I had not reached yet. I told her I was willing to try. I told her that trying looked like showing up consistently over time, not a single conversation, not a letter, not a visit. Time. I would need to see it in time, she nodded. She looked like she understood for the first time what she was actually being asked to do. Before she left, she told me about Brittany. Derek had moved out the week after the wedding. Not permanently, he had said, but he needed time to think. His family had done some quiet asking around about Callaway Visual Co. and had come back with a very different picture of me than the one Brittany had been drawing for years. His mother had apparently been cold to Brittany at a family dinner, and Brittany had come home and called my mother in pieces. My mother said Brittany was not doing well. I told her I hoped she would be okay. I meant it. 6 weeks after all of this, something happened that I had not expected. Derek reached out again. He asked if he could meet me, just to talk, no agenda. We met at a coffee shop in Nashville, neutral ground. He was exactly as he had seemed in that voicemail. Direct. Honest. Visibly tired. He told me the marriage was going to survive, that they were in counseling, that Brittany was working through some things she had probably needed to work through for a long time. He told me he was not asking me to forgive her, or to repair anything I was not ready to repair. He just wanted me to know that she was starting to understand what she had done. He also told me that when Brittany finally talked openly in one of their sessions about our childhood, about the favoritism, about the way I had been treated, she had cried in a way he had never seen before. Not for herself. For me, I did not know what to do with that. I still do not entirely know what to do with it. But I am holding it carefully. It is now 8 months later. Aunt Deborah is doing better. Her heart condition is being managed, and she sounds more like herself every week. The jewelry collections is still in a secure storage facility. I have had it reappraised, and I am working with a small museum in Franklin to display several of the pieces as part of a permanent exhibit honoring women in the region's history. Aunt Deborah approved that plan immediately. She said, "Yes, that is exactly right. My mother and I talk every Sunday. She asks about the studio. She asks about my life. She is learning to listen. It is still awkward sometimes, but it is real. Brittany called me 3 weeks ago. She talked for about 4 minutes and then she stopped and said, 'I do not have the right words yet.' I said, 'Then keep working on them.' She said she would. I believe her. Not because I am naive, but because I recognize the sound of someone telling the truth for the first time. I have learned something through all of this that I want to say plainly. Being unseen by your family does not make you invisible to the world. The work you do in silence still counts. The life you build when no one is watching is still real. And the moment the truth surfaces, and it always surfaces, the only thing that matters is who you already are underneath it. I did not drive to Atlanta to tear my sister apart. I drove there to place a truth on a gift table and walk away with my dignity. I drove there because I had spent 31 years waiting for my family to see me, and I had finally accepted that I could not wait anymore. I had to show up for myself the way they had not. So let me ask you this before I go. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth? Have you ever carried something quietly for so long that, when it finally came out, you were almost surprised by your own relief? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about people who stood up quietly and changed everything, the next one is already waiting for you. I think you will want to see it through to the end. Until next time. Remember this. You do not have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is simply let the truth speak for itself.